this webinar seeking the blessings of the Almighty. Silent prayer. Small cheer and great welcome makes a merry feast. Now, I call upon Dr. P.D. Sylvia, Head, Department of English, to spread the ray of happiness through her cordial words of felicitation.
Thank you, Infancy. Respected Principal Dr. C. Veerabahu, Dr. Mrs. Mala Ranganathan, the Speaker of the Day, faculty members and student participants from various colleges, good evening to you all. It is a moment of extreme pleasure to welcome you all for this webinar on the Times Plague, Reflections of Plague in Shakespeare's Dramas. On behalf of the Department of English, I welcome our esteemed principal and express my regards for making this webinar possible. A very warm welcome to the resource person, Dr. Mrs. Mala Ranganathan. I register my sense of gratitude for accepting our invitation, and really we are honored to have you here virtually, ma'am. My regards to each one of you present here, making this webinar functional. The topic of the seminar is based on the global problem pandemics and how such hard times have their impact on literature as well. The title, it's The Times Plague, is from Shakespeare's King Lear, and it shows the timelessness of Shakespeare's works. Human history has survived many moments of crisis and natural calamity like pandemics, and they are not new in the history of mankind. They are referred to in many works of literature, and they have given birth to several well-known works of literature too. It is in the 14th century the plague got its prominence, not only in the history of pandemics, but also in the history of literature. Boccaccio's Decameron, a famous work of literature, has captured the experiences of the disasters caused by the disease in the form of stories. Albert Camus, in his plagues, describes the pandemics as something that rules out any future. We get the reference of plagues in many other works like that of Daniel Defoe's, Mary Shelley's, etc. And Anandamurti's Samskara refers plague as a symbol of stagnant orthodox values. The outbreak of Spanish flu is also mentioned in many works of literature. Rabindranath Tagore, in one of his Bengali poems, has referred the outbreak of smallpox. Thakli Sivashankaran Pillai highlights the human emotions at the time of crisis in his stories. Just like the pandemics of plague, cholera also occupies a prominent place in pandemic literature. At the outset, pandemics gave birth to the works of literature that captured the moments of human emotions at the times of mass crisis. In a life in quarantine, these works of literature help us to find a sense of life. With this, once again, I welcome one and all and wish this webinar a relevant one during this pandemic period. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your pleasant words. May I invite now Dr. P.T. Selvi Kokila, Assistant Professor, Department of English, to introduce the resource person.
Thank you, Infancy. With great pleasure, I would like to introduce the speaker of the virtual meet, Dr. Mala Ranganathan, Professor and HOD of English, Northeastern Hill University, Shillong. And she belongs to Thoothukudi, and she is a very good friend of mine. Regarding her education, she did her BA English in St. Mary's College, Thoothukudi, and received her postgraduate degree in MK University and continued her doctoral theory also from MK University. And the title of her doctoral degree is Maria Irene Fornes Theatre Study. And in the year 1994, she stepped into the teaching in Assam University. And then in the year 2003, she joined NEHU Shillong, University Shillong. Until date, she is serving in the university as a teacher. She evinces great interest in performance studies and has received the following awards. Fulbright Fellowship in the Department of Theatre, Film and Dance in Long Island University, New York. And she has also received UPIASI Asia Fellowship for a project proposal on women in Chinese theatre in the year 1999. And she was also awarded the Osmania University Center for International Program postdoctoral fellowship for 2010 and 11. And she has also received the IAAS Shimla Associateship for a research proposal on women's narratives on terror and sexual violence for the year 2012 and 15. And 7 of her scholars were awarded PhD, and 5 were pursuing their research under her competent guidance. And she completed UGC major research project entitled Gendering Terrorism in South Asian Narratives in the post 9/11 era, a select study of Indian, Pakistani, Afghan, and Sri Lankan writings in English. And 3 of her books were, I'm very proud that 3 of her books were published by Routledge, London, and New York, and 1 in India. And she has written 50 articles which are published in peer-reviewed journals, and out of which 12 articles were published in books, among which 4 are international. She has convened and participated in seminars, delivered lectures, and designed courses, and has undertaken various UGC assignments like member UGC Expert Committee for the consideration of applications for the award of Ishan Uday, member UGC Expert Committee for grant of PG affiliation to various assigned colleges, member UGC Committee as part of UGC team for visit to colleges and hostel building matters, member UGC Review Committee for SAP program in the Department of English, Mizoram University, member various selection committees appointed by Central Agricultural University in Paul and NIT Arunachal, and member of various UGC appointed expert committees, including Expert Committee for Evaluation of Project Proposals, Conference Financial Assistance held by UGC ERO Kolkata. And grown up in the empire of drama, she has directed multi-number of places. And now it is very apt that she's going to dwell on the topic, which is a cup of tea. And I wholeheartedly welcome my friend Mala Ranganathan to deliver her speech. Thank you.
Plague was the single and the most powerful force shaping Shakespeare's life and those of his contemporaries, wrote Jonathan Bate, one of his biographers. Shakespeare was entwined with the plague from the day of his birth. He managed to thrive through 3 major plagues and carved out a hugely successful career and gained nationwide reputation. We are all bound thither. We are hastening to the common goal. Plagues call all things under the sway of its laws. What's true of all the evils in the world is true of plague as well. It helps men to rise above themselves. The bubonic plague spread fast and cramped filth of early modern London, even with the quarantines. Shakespeare secretly used this as a weapon to write plays taking inspiration from the society. I am pleased to invite Professor Dr. Mala Ranganathan, Head, Department of English, Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, to enrich us with her views on the topic of the day. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this webinar and deliver a talk on the topic, the Times Plague, reflection of plague in Shakespearean dramas. First of all, I would like to thank the principal of VO Sidambaram College, Dr. Veera Babu, and I also would like to thank the head of the department, Dr. Sylvia, and the organizer, Dr. Selvi Kohila. Sorry, did I make a mistake? Sorry?
Go ahead, Mala.
Huh?
Go ahead.
Yeah, did I make a mistake?
No.
Okay, fine. So I thank the head of the department. I thank Dr. Selvi Kohila, who is also my classmate. We were classmates in St. Mary's College, and I vividly remember, her interactions and her love for literature. So it is, it is almost like a homecoming for me to attend this webinar. I also would like to thank, I appreciate the style in which Infancy is also introducing the whole webinar. With these words, I would like to go into my lecture. Of course, Selvi Kohila said so many things. I don't know how far. These are all part of the academic, academic progress and academic activities, and I don't think I've done anything unique, except that just spend every moment of my time as an academician, to just work hard and learn, because as a teacher, first of all, you have to learn, you have to be a student. After teaching Shakespeare, still I feel that there is Shakespeare is always, he grows always abound, I feel. So Shakespeare is an ocean. I have been teaching Macbeth and Richard III, especially during the pandemic. And it is making really a lot of sense when one teaches these plays during the pandemic, during the COVID-19, lockdown. The last 19 months of COVID-19, we can say that these were the times of the spread of the pandemic, and the lockdown, of course, would have been very comfortable for, people like us, salaried classes and maybe economically stronger sections. However, the lockdown had been detrimental to the working classes, with factories closing down and workers having to leave their places of work, and migration on the progress at the time. So one can only imagine what would have been the situation of the theater artists, or situation of artists in general, having to face this joblessness after the closure of theaters. That is only the tip of the iceberg of what the artists must have faced during the lockdown. So in such an environment of medical emergency due to the lockdown, what is it which happened in theater environment? These were the questions which came to me were in my mind. I started some explorations on this. I was doing already. Where are all the theater artists? I used to think now. Who were performing probably earlier in Prithvi Theatre or National School of Drama repertories pre-COVID-19. What has happened to them? How many theater houses are still performing? We don't know. And if they could still be and how did the pandemic affect the way theatre was performed? So these were some questions which I had been exploring, and I'm sure that something will come out of it. But at a time when the pandemic in the form of COVID-19 has affected the arts and performance of arts, one can only think, one can only imagine, one can only reconstruct, what would have happened. How did the closure of London theatres due to the plague in 1592, 1603, 1606, and 1609, what would have happened? How did the closures, affect Elizabethan drama in general? And how did it affect Shakespeare's creation of plays? What reflections of the Great Plague were there in Shakespeare's plays, particularly the late plays? Can we relate what happened during the pandemic plague of that time to the present times, to our present times? So these are, this is a concern. This was the main concern of how I ended up choosing this topic when Selvi asked me to, give a talk for this webinar. But certainly here I'm not here to just give a kind of documentation of plague. That is not my concern here. The concern of my talk is certainly not the pandemic itself, but the human response to pandemic. What was the human response to plague? I mean, the most common aspect of any pandemic is certainly the fact that how it causes havoc, how it causes sickness, how it causes death across the globe through viruses. But what is the most interesting, and unique dimension is the human response to it. And what better way in which one can read Shakespeare's plays but to understand this human response to sickness. This is what personally also, when I was going through this, when I was experiencing this COVID-19 lockdown in the campus, in the Nehu campus, Northeastern Hill University is a premier university in the Northeast, the first central university, to open in the Northeast in 1973. And so next year we will be 2023, we will be completing 50 years. That apart. So what is the most interesting aspect or the unique dimension, I think, is the human response to the pandemic. And Shakespeare's plays, I think from my own, I've not read all the plays, but from my close reading of Macbeth, I understand what a unique aesthetic way in which Shakespeare responds to pandemic, and to the pandemic plague. It's true, of course. It is that concern which you will find that comes out in my first slide when I talk about just the quotation from Sonnet 14. And not from the stars do I my judgment pluck, and yet methinks I have astronomy, but not to tell of good or evil luck, of plagues, of dearths or seasons quality. So
share the screen, Mala. We are not able to see you.
Oh, okay. I'm just sharing. Yeah. Can you see now?
No, Mala.
Are you able to see now?
No.
Okay.
Okay, you can continue then. If it is not feasible, please continue then.
Yeah. So I'll just go back and again share it because it must have been already in the screen, no?
It is not here. We are not able to see your screen. That's it. Or you can continue, Mala, without sharing the screen.
Okay.
I'll
just continue, but anyway, I will read it so you can understand. So this is one sonnet, from Sonnet 14, where the speaker talks about the stars that can be. I don't want to explain further. So this is one important aspect I wanted to talk about. I don't think Shakespeare's concern really is the plague. I don't think Shakespeare is giving a documentary realism of plague. So the second, quotation which I'm projecting in the first slide, it is the time's plague when the madmen lead the blind. So this is again from King Lear, when Gloucester is led by his son Edward. Gloucester cannot see his son since he is blind already, and how Edward tries to act like a madman, and he's leading trying to lead Gloucester. And so when Gloucester says it's a time's plague when the madmen lead the blind, here plague becomes a metaphor of the decay of the times. So, so this is, I think, important to understand Shakespeare's reflection of plague in his dramas. So, and then if you look at the history of plague, already some kind of introduction was given by infancy. We talk about bubonic plague or the black plague, black death. So plague was something which was endemic from for almost 20 to 50 years, even from the Chaucerian times. And this transmission of this plague is nothing but the transmission of the bacteria, Yersinia pestis. And, it comes to humans via infected rats. This is what is told. And it had existed for several centuries, from the Chaucerian times even to Elizabethan and Jacobean times. Several epidemics during Elizabethan times also had, happened. And this was called as the second pandemic plague. And this, the plague was supposed to have its origin in Gobi Desert, and it had probably spread to Europe via traders. So this is some of the points to remember regarding the history of plague. And the plague outbreaks had ravaged the city of London between 1593 to 1603, and also from 1603 to even up to 1611. So, and plague, which was endemic to England, had caused deaths of almost 2/3 of the population. So, this is the things to remember about the plague, history of plague. Of course, there were many, what we call as plague texts. Certainly, Shakespeare's texts are not one of those so-called plague texts that we talk about. Because, for example, Daniel Defoe in 1722, he wrote a journal of the plague year. And this is about the spread of plague and human behavior. He talks about the bubonic plague of 1665, which was the Great Plague of London. And he makes major observations, in this particular journal. He talks about how the officials went about lowering the actual number of deaths. And there was a forced lockdown of the family members within the houses, despite having both infected as well as not infected family members. So which means it would have spread to the not infected ones too. Then Defoe, of course, describes a plague of 355 years. A plague that took place 355 years ago. And this is a frightful reminder of today's situation. Similarly, Defoe talks about the face of London. How the whole face of London underwent tremendous changes due to plague. So similarly, there are other writers who, in the third slide, I have mentioned some of these texts. And these texts are Boccaccio's Decameron. It's a 1348 text. Thomas Decker's plague pamphlets from 1603. And then you have where, Thomas Dekker, very good. It's on its own coming, or I don't know. You're able to see it now? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you, Infancy. And then Thomas Dekker, he mentions this hungry plague, cattle to death, I quote, who eats up all, yet famisheth. So plague, like an hungry, individual who, goes on eating up, but still he is hungry. So this is how, Thomas Dekker describes plague in his pamphlets. And in fact, another image of Dekker is very scary, where he talks about all the dead people of the plague. They are all buried in a grave almost. It's like as though they are the mass graves that he talks about, with all plague infected and dead being buried together, almost like as though they are sharing a single bed. So, it's very scary the way Decker writes in his plague pamphlets. And then, of course, we have William Austin on 1666 plague, Simon Foreman about the plague that actually ravaged his health, even though he recovered. And of course, Ben Jonson in his Alchemist, it talks about a house in the plague lockdown amidst the presence of servants and the absent master. Of course, Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet is the only play of Shakespeare probably where plague appears as an event. I don't think, to my reading, whatever reading I've done, to my reading, I don't think that there is any other play which you can mention as where, plague comes as an event. Plague is used as a verb, it's used as a kind of word of abuse, plague upon you, okay, or somebody being plagued by death, or, so plague is used as a verb, plague is used as a noun, but at the same time, you don't find any other play other than Romeo and Juliet where plague appears as an event. Then Thomas Nass's poem, A Litany in Time of Plague, which is almost documents, plague. Okay. Then Daniel Defoe, of course, Journal of Plague here, and Alexandro Mansome's The Betrothal. Alexandro Mansome is actually an Italian writer. Okay. In his novel, 1827 novel, The Betrothal, he talks about the bubonic plague in 1630. And, he brings out this idea of how people are so angry with the official lackadaisical approach to the control of the disease, and how the superstitious beliefs are used to, control plague. So, and this is both, of course, common with both Defoe as well as Millen. Okay. Then, of course, we also know Albert Camus' text, The Plague. This is a 1947 text, and it is about the French Algerian town of Oran, and how it fails to prepare for this kind of a threat of plague because of the stubbornness. Sometimes even today, during the pandemic, I see, at least from my experience here, I see there is a lot of resistance to get vaccinated. There is a lot of resistance, and to the extent where here the DC had to, the district commissioner had to monitor constantly, okay, official records and how many are vaccinated, the vaccination record, so that, it somehow it is, people are forced to do the vaccination. So this, you can see that that stubbornness, why this resistance to vaccination, because somehow this belief in us that no, we will not be infected. Why should we think so? Are we exclusive? Are we unique? So anyway, so this idea, the stubbornness to think that they will not be infected, they will not be affected. So there is this denial or refusing to believe that they can be infected, and which is something common, as I tell you, as a reaction to pandemic too. So living in how it is to live in the shadow of death. That's what Camus, the plague reveals. And Camus, in fact, very interesting thing about Camus is, this his writing brings out this idea that if we accept the fragility of life, that anything can happen anytime, then there lies our freedom. So plague is, I think, reflected in Camus as a shared struggle, as a shared grief, which demands collective action. Okay, so that is the same message, I think, which the pandemic also gives us. It may cause havoc, but still we need to live in the present time. We are all, as one of the narrators, the narrator, Dr. Ryu in Albert Camus' The Plague says, we are all involved in it. So is it clear? Can I proceed further? So please go back to the previous slide. Just go back to the previous slide. Yeah, scenes of plague outbreaks. So, this seem to be from whatever plague text, little bit whatever I have read about the 16th century plague scene. This notices of death, what we call as bills of mortality, and then there's mountebanks and their magical potions, because that is the time when mountebanks are, or these quack doctors, apothecaries, they are all busy with preparing their magical potions and plague pills and selling them too. You remember this Ben Jonson's Volpone, where when the mountebank, he mounts the platform, of course, for other reasons, not really to sell the pills, but to attract the attention of Volpone's wife, Celia, young and beautiful wife, Celia. But still, if you read, you will understand the kind of belief that people had in these mountebanks, and they were cheated also. Then, of course, these were the scenes: street fires and rosemary bunches at the entrances, just like how, for when there is a pox, chicken pox, or, we use neem leaves. Or nowadays, we see that turmeric becomes a very important immunity booster for pandemic. Similarly, you can see that rosemary bunches used to be kept in the entrances as a symbol of warding off evil. And of course, the migration of the rich to the countryside, it took place very often. The rich people, because they thought that the city is full, and so therefore it's better to move to the countryside. And so they migrated to the countryside, and therefore there was more danger of such infections. And in fact, we are told that Privy Council very often, stopped the place because the theaters were closed, because the spread in the suburbs was more. Why? Because many of the plays which we used to be performed during the Elizabethan times, were staged in the suburban, theater houses, like, of course, the Globe Theatre, the theatres, Swan, and all these. And so probably they must have thought that spread plague. In fact, Globe had to close down. Globe Theatre had to close down, as we all know, because of plague, since the seating arrangement was so compact. 300 people could sit together, and very closely. So that was one reason for also the spread of the disease. And this large red cross on the door, which was the symbol of the infected staying in the house. And of course, the incessant ringing of the plague card bell, which was used as a carriage for the dead body. So these were familiar scenes during the plague outbreaks in London, as told in one of the plague texts. So can we just skip now? After plague texts, come to the next slide. Shakespeare and plague. As we all know, as I have already discussed, severe outbreaks of plague took place during Shakespeare's times, and 1582, 1592 to 93, 1603 to 4, and 1606, and then 1608 to 1609. And in fact, the historian Leeds Barrell, he says that between 1606 to 1610, when Shakespeare wrote some of his greatest plays, Macbeth, Antony and Cleopatra, The Winter's Tale, The Tempest, it seems that during that period, hardly only 9 months, the theatre houses were kept open. So you must have understand. I can understand the kind of loss which theatre houses must have, experienced. And of course, the summer of 1606, again, plague erupted, and that led to the closure of theatres for almost 7 months. So, and between 1603 to 1604, when there was an eruption of epidemic, that too around Queen Elizabeth's death, and due to which all the coronation festivities of her successor, King James, had to be postponed. And also that, remember, these are some, of course, how true they are, we don't know, but these are some aspects which are brought out when we discuss how Shakespeare could have been affected by plague. That, but this is this fact that weeks after his baptism in 1564, that is which took place in Holy Trinity Church in Stratford upon Avon, and it seems that register of baptism, it reads thus: "Hic incepit pestis," which means here begins the plague. So, but luckily, probably, it's lucky for us and lucky for Shakespeare that he survived the plague years, even though he grew up in the shadow of the plague years. So, because normally, infant mortality, infant deaths are also common during the plague outbreaks. And so anyway, so this closure of theatres certainly must have affected his income, as he started in theatre. As we all know, it's always told that he was a gatekeeper or a stable boy. So anyway, because he was in charge of the admissions, the spectators coming in, and certainly the closure of theatre must have monetarily affected him. And it is also told that probably, there was a probable loss of 2 of his infants, and also a 7-year-old son due to plague. Because these are, of course, difficult to prove. These are all, again, stories, and how far they are true, we don't know. But certainly, from what he writes in his plays, we can see whatever facts are there, we can understand, because we know when the plague outbreaks took place. And so despite closure of theatre in 1592-93, remember, there was a successful production of his narrative poems, that is Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece. Similarly, even though it was plague years between 1592 to 1603, he wrote some of his best plays, and particularly most of his tragedies, major tragedies. Richard III, of course, Richard III is, we consider more it as a history play, but at the same time, it is also a tragedy. And Macbeth, we all know, is a major tragedy. Hamlet, Othello, and King Lear. And he also wrote Twelfth Night. Despite postponement of, see, I also understand this. I told you that 1603 to 1604, plague outbreak was there, and that was the time when Queen Elizabeth also died. And after that, King James took over as the, as the King of England and Scotland. And despite postponement of all the coronation celebrations of King James, Shakespeare, if you look at Measure for Measure, it was written during that time. So he must have continued his writing of Measure for Measure, which is a play about civic corruption. So, no wonder, probably, even a plague was the site for such corruption too. As we see, lockdown today in India is taken advantage of, and that is the time when violation of rules and regulations have been made. Okay, and plague, as I told you that I have already mentioned that plague, certainly in Shakespeare, in my, from my reading, plague is not presented. Plague does not become part of a documentary realism. I don't think plague is a subject of documentary realism in Shakespeare. Plague becomes a prominent event, of course, as I told you, in Romeo and Juliet. So plague is not really the theme or subject of his plays, Just as war is not a subject in Beckett. If you see Waiting for Godot, not a single mention of war will be there. I don't know if you can find out a single word of, Second World War or World War, nothing. But all the ravages of war, symbols of ravages of war will be there in Beckett's Waiting for Godot. If you read the play carefully, you will understand. The play is very much about violence, very much about, people being reduced to nothing, to tramps or whatever, people being reduced to nothing. So just as war is not a subject in Beckett, you can see that plague is not really the theme of the subject of his plays. Shakespeare's interest in plague, that's why I tell you that it's not one of documentary nature. He's bringing documentary realism of plague in his plays. Or in other words, he's not bringing out bills of mortality or statistics of death due to plague. But what is important is to notice is the macro narrative of the epidemic. Okay, somehow within the micro narrative of a tragedy like King Lear or Romeo and Juliet, or even in Macbeth, within that micro narrative of tragedy, within that what you can say, within the fabric of the tragic narrative, you end up you end up realizing that there is a macro narrative of the epidemic. All that ravages created by the epidemic, the violence of death. Violence I say because plague is merciless. The plague pandemic is merciless. It had turned almost 2/3 of the population of England, in the grave. So the merciless way in which an epidemic can cause death. That's why it used to be described as earlier, even Decameron talks about the dance macabre, the dance of death. Where death is imagined as a kind of what you can say, as a kind of a skeletal man, okay, who is there with all the people, looking at these people. The people are not even aware that they are going to die. They go about doing their work routinely, but then suddenly one day it strikes. So that is the macabre dance, macabre, the dance of death, which we talk about. So somehow, and that eerie feeling that such a dance macabre creates within us, right? One moment somebody is there, the other moment is no more. So that eerie feeling one gets when one encounters death in this manner. So that experience of it becomes a macro narrative. Somehow the macro narrative of the epidemic is sort of somehow gets transfused into the micro narrative of the tragedy. So that decay that you find, that you experience in Macbeth, the kind of what you can say, the depth of leadership, both in Macbeth and King Richard III, a sense of death, a sense of sickness, a sense of a world of decay. That is created because of that experience of the epidemic, according to me. So that's why so the macro narrative of the epidemic somehow gets transfused into the micro narrative of the tragedy. I'll give examples from Macbeth. You can just wait. I'll postpone the description or the explanation of this particular. When I come to Macbeth, then you will understand. Plague as a prominent event, of course, as I told you, figures only in Romeo and Juliet, and as an infectious pestilence, and something that prevents the lovers meeting at the right moment, because Romeo is forced into quarantine. Yeah, it's okay. Romeo is forced into quarantine, and that isolation and Romeo's quarantine somehow leads to their fatal ends. So the delay, yeah. And then, of course, this is not my opinion. Plague as a narrative vaccine is again discussed somewhere. I read about this, but I think it's something very relevant here, where when we see plague is a great leveler because it strikes everyone. It does not leave the rich or the poor. Everybody, are reduced to the same. So plague is a great leveler. So, this plague erasing all social, gender, and personal difference. Yeah, sorry. I can't hear you. Is it clear? Is it clear what I'm saying?
Yeah, Mala. Yes, Mala.
There is some talk, that's why I thought whether. Okay, I'll continue. So Shakespeare plague. You can see that Shakespeare's work probably looks at, maybe, if at all it looks at plague, maybe it looks at plague as a narrative action. Why? Because plague sort of reduces, it erases all social, gender, and personal differences. Whereas the way Shakespeare responds to the plague is not, not like, looking at it in a documentary, perspective, but looking at it or responding to plague through his emphasis on people's unique and inerasable differences, despite whatever suffering one undergoes. Particularly if you see in tragedy, the tragedy, it begins with tragedies. Shakespeare's tragedies always begins with conflict, okay, and there is always a crisis, and there is a kind of fragmentation of the hero, of the tragic hero. But at the end, even if the play ends with death, you will see a sense of reconciliation of the tragic hero. You also see a sense of the nation being handed over to the safe hands. It's not that any Shakespearean tragedy will end with the idea that, okay, there is it might begin with fragmentation, it might begin with chaos, but certainly it ends with the chaos restored because the kingdom is handed over to the right king. So, this aspect of emphasizing on, people, emphasizing on unity, how does that come? It is because of the emphasis on people's unique and inerasable differences. So, it is in that sense, I think I consider plague as the way it is used. Shakespeare's work probably does not act as a documentation of plague, but rather as a narrative vaccine. What is the remedy? Okay, remedy may be through exploration, verbal exploration, aesthetic exploration. There is suffering, there is sickness, there is everything. At the same time, how do we come out of that? So Shakespeare's plays gives, I think, that the kind of solution to this, to the sickness and decay and all that. Is it clear what I'm trying to say? Can I continue?
Mala, if you have.
Yeah.
Over, Mala?
No. There's still left. Is it late? Or I'll just quickly go through 2 more slides and then I'll wind up.
Okay.
So I just wanted to look at very quickly King Lear. Please go to the next slide. After plague as subject, after Macbeth, go to King Lear. Next one. Next slide. Yes. See, Shakespeare's world of plague as a world that draws time to a standstill. Okay, causing decay, both physical and mental. That's why this word time's plague, it symbolizes bankruptcy of leadership. It's a time's plague when the madman leads the blind. A leader cannot afford to be a madman. That is the most dangerous thing that we can have if we have a leader who is a madman. So therefore, that is the times plague. So the decay, both physical and mental, that is what is drawn through the world of plague. Then his reference to his daughter Regan as the plague sore or a carbuncle corrupting my blood. And the curse of Regan and her husband, he curses Regan and her husband with the following, this vengeance, plague, death, and confusion. And this is again, you remember that they are young people, and he's cursing them with plague. So this is again and probably an allegory of violence on youth. Violence on youth is a reality during his times, since many of the deaths among the plague infected were mostly, young people. So then please go back to the previous slide, Macbeth. Macbeth was performed in the spring of 1606, and it is said that the play vividly expresses what it must have felt like when the whole population of a country or a town fell into the iron grip of plague. You see, if you see the beginning lines, not really the beginning lines, but after a couple of the beginning lines, this fair is foul, the witch's entry, and they say fair is foul, foul is fair, over through the fog and filthy air. Please understand that also this it was the medieval belief that there was toxic breath of the witches, and that was poisonous, and there were even medieval medicines and remedies also for that. Okay, so this beginning image is a metaphor of plague. So it actually it brings out the whole atmosphere of plague, the world of plague. What makes it so? That's why Stephen Greenblatt, he talks about how we almost afraid to know itself, expire before the flowers in the cups, dying or they sicken. This is again a description of a country in the corrupting blood group of a vicious plague. That's why Stephen Greenblatt, when he talks about the reflection of plague in Macbeth, he says this is a different plague altogether. The plague, what is the different plague? The plague of being governed by, I think I missed out one word there. Anyway, it's okay. This is enough. It's understood. The plague of being governed by a morally bankrupt, blood-soaked, and ultimately self-destructive leader. So Macbeth as a self-destructive leader, and so therefore plague is symbolic of disorder. Okay, I mean, so that is how I think Shakespeare tries to look at. So therefore, please go to the last slide. Approach. So I think I'm sorry, the previous one. Yeah, approach to plague. So Shakespeare's approach to plague, as I told you, there is no documentary realism of plague in Shakespeare's plays. The mood of the plague in tragedy, just as death is a great leveler in tragedy, plague too is a great leveler. Plague, as I told you, symbolizes the dance macabre or the death of dance. That is the medieval idea of the dance of death. And as a metaphor, plague as a metaphor of the physical and mental decay, the decay of the times. Plague is a metaphor of the world of chaos under a disorderly leader. Plague is not just the major concern in Shakespeare, but it becomes a smoke screen for the aesthetic narrative on lives, individuals, and countries' decay. So plague as a narrative vaccine, when I said it is an aesthetic vehicle that helps Shakespeare exactly, that helps Shakespeare to convey exactly the opposite of what the plague does to the environment. Plague or pandemic actually distorts, it destroys structures, it brings down the fall of societies, brings down the fall of nations, tears them apart. It erases all the personal, social, gender differences. Whereas, how does Shakespeare respond? He responds by emphasizing on people's unique and inerasable differences. So that is the, I think, uniqueness in his treatment of plague. And if you look at some of the plague imagery, this is the last slide. Love and plague. Love, particularly in, it becomes love as something indiscriminate. Love as something contagious. Love as sickness and plague. So this is what is told, in Romeo and Juliet. Then plague as a metaphor for eye infection that comes in Richard III. And the image of sickness and disease abounds in Macbeth. Since there's no time to explain, I'm just only just describing it. There are plenty of images of sickness and diseases. If you look at especially the sleepwalking scene of Lady Macbeth, you will see different expressions of sickness and diseases, and even cure for it. So plague as an expression of verbal abuse or curse, because in Act 2, if I remember right, in Macbeth, the word plagued is used. Plagued is used in the sense that somebody, suffering, plagued by something. So, and even characters of contagion. I cannot explain this. This is little more time is there. Selvi, do I get another 2 more minutes?
Okay, Mala, 2 more minutes.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
So this image of snake, very interesting in Macbeth. Snake, normally we say it is, if you look at the religious aspect of it, snake as something evil. But at the same time, I'm sure Shakespeare must be aware of the positive image of snake. Snake was considered as a redeemer of a city from plague, according to Roman beliefs. So how this atmosphere, this recurrent image of snake as a symbol of evil, as a symbol of death, but however, the snake is also a redeemer of the city of plague in Roman myths. And I'm sure that Shakespeare must have been aware of it. But anyway, here he uses it as a symbol of evil. But very, very interesting for me. From my reading today also, I read the whole play in the morning. And very, very interesting aspect, I think, that comes out of plague as a imagery, as an image in Macbeth, is the role of the witches. Very often, when I used to teach the play, I always used to think, why, if Macbeth is evil, but why is it that so the supernatural elements are the one who actually kindle that evil nature in him? Otherwise, he begins as a hero and he dwindles as a villain, right? So it is the supernatural elements, but if you many of the symbols associated with many of the images associated with the, whether it is Hecate or whether these witches, you will find that they are basically images of filthiness, images of decay, images of sickness, and the way they are boiling the cauldron with all the entrails of human entrails as well as animal entrails. So all that you can see, they are the extension of evil, and whether through Shakespeare used these witches and the witch's head, that is Hecate, as a kind of smoke screen for the experience of plague. This is, I think, a very important point that came to my mind today. So with that, I think I stop here, and if there's any time for interaction, then I can explain. Yeah. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts on Shakespeare and plague.
Infancy? Infancy?
Ma'am?
Ma'am, you can ask if they have any questions, and you can come to the end.
So the forum is now open for question and answer session. Participants can post their question in the chat box.
And Infancy, please moderate. You can just read out the questions in the chat box.
Sure, ma'am.
So, No interactions, no questions in fancy.
Thank you, ma'am, for nourishing and enlightening us with your views on the ravages created by plague and highlighting us the views on plague as a great leveler through the plays of Shakespeare. Thank you for sharing your ingenious gift through your thought-provoking lecture. Gratitude is the fairest blossom which springs from soul. It is the spark that lights a fire of joy in a soul. I now call upon Mrs. College Sharmila, Assistant Professor, Department of English, to deliver the words of gratitude.
Good evening, everybody. Gratitude paints little smiley faces on everything it touches. Yes, it is indeed a pleasure to propose the vote of thanks. Let me first thank our Almighty for His abundance for the resounding success of today's webinar. My heartfelt thanks are due to our Honorable Secretary, Shri APCV Chokalingam Sir, and our most respected principal, Dr. C. Veerabahu Sir, for they have always been the co-architects of all our academic endeavors. I extend my most sincere thanks to our resource person, Dr. Mala Ranganathan, for her enriching erudite session on the times plague reflection of plague in Shakespeare's dramas. Ma'am, you perfectly elaborated on the unique response of William Shakespeare to the plague through his dramas. Thank you, ma'am. I express my hearty thanks to our faculty friends from our neighboring colleges within Tamil Nadu and across the country for their kind participation. I'm also grateful to all the research scholars and PG students from various colleges and our college for their scholarly participation. I'm very much thankful to the teaching fraternity of the Department of English, V. Chidambam College, for their valuable support in the successful conduct of this webinar. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And any questions, you can always write to me. I'm available at malareng@yahoo.com. Malareng, MALARENG @yahoo.com. You're most welcome to give your feedback. And certainly I would look forward. Thank you so much.
It was really interesting listening to you, ma'am, with all the quotes, and it was really interesting, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.